Hi there. In this video, I'll be showing you how to set up a layout switcher in Bricks. No extra plugins needed, just Bricks interactions, CSS, and a tiny bit of JavaScript for accessibility. Before we continue, I have to credit Sridhar Katukam for the original idea behind this tutorial. I apologize if I mispronounced the name. And just like it did for me, I hope this opens your eyes to what's possible just by playing with CSS classes and the Bricks interactions feature. You can see it's absolutely possible to pull this off without any need for custom JavaScript, mostly because there are two separate buttons for switching between grid and list layouts. In our case, however, we will be making a custom toggle switch, which by nature comes with some accessibility limitations that we will need custom JavaScript to address. So first, we will create the toggle button with its interactions, after which we will work on the post list to change its layout depending on the state of the toggle button. And finally, we will make the button accessible. It all boils down to adding and removing a single CSS class and controlling how specific elements look and behave when that class is present or absent. Let's get into it. I have a list of posts here, nothing special, just a list of posts in a grid container populated by a query loop, all standard stuff. To begin, I'm going to select the section and add a container which will contain our toggle button. Then inside that container, I'll add a button, but we can't use the pre-made button element in this case because we're not making a regular style of button. So we have to create our own button from scratch. Instead, I'll add a div element and change the tag to button. Next, I'll add the first SVG icon and set the source to code. This will allow us to copy any valid SVG code and paste it in the text area. It's so much faster than downloading then uploading an SVG file. You also have direct access to modify the SVG code if necessary. My favorite source for free high-quality icons is Phosphor Icons. You can easily search for the icon you need, which is grid in this case, and copy the SVG code. I'll paste the raw SVG in the text area and sign the code. Next, I'll duplicate the element and follow the same process to import another icon for the row layout. Now we have to assign CSS classes so we can control the button and icon styling. I'll use the BEM tool, which comes with the automatic CSS plugin, to assign classes to these elements. Now, if you don't have a CSS installed, you can go ahead and apply the classes manually. In styling the button, the first thing I'd like to do is set the display property to flex with the direction set to row. This should arrange the icons horizontally, but I'll have to refresh the builder for this change to be visible for some reason. I also want to align the contents of the button layout container to the right, so I'll select the container and align items to flex end. I'll set the background color to a light variation of the action color for it to stand out a bit. To begin styling, I'll first define some variables which we will use across the board to make the button scalable. It will also help our calculations as we progress. I'll call the first variable toggle space 0.8 m and the second one toggle icon size 1.5 m. Now I'll set the padding to the toggle space variable. I'll also select the icon class. In case you're wondering, root here is a placeholder for the current element's class name. This makes it possible to change the class name in future without breaking the custom code. And because we are using the BEM method, it's easy to reference the icons. So what we really have here is essentially layout toggle double underscore icon. So I'll set the icon width and height to the toggle icon size variable. Now that I think of it, the button might be too small. So for the sake of this tutorial, I'll temporarily set the size to 4M. Back to the layout toggle, I'll set the gap also to toggle space. Next, we have to create the switch indicator. For this, we have to use a before pseudo element. Now the width will be the sum of the button padding and the icon size. Thankfully, we've defined these values in our local variables. By the way, the quick completion you see happening with the variables is also a function of ACSS. The indicator is visible now with the background color, but we want it to exist behind the icons and not take up space in the flex box. So I'll give it position absolute. Set the top position from 0. Now we obviously haven't set the relative position of the parent, so I'll go ahead and set the position of the layout button to relative. While we're at it, I'll also set the isolation to isolate. This will make sure that the z-index of all elements inside the layout toggle is relative to the layout toggle. So when I come back and set the z-index of our indicator to -1, it doesn't fall back beyond its parent. Now I don't want the indicator to be aligned flush to the top left as it is now. So instead of 0, I'll set the position to half the toggle space by using the calc function. Finally, I'll round out the button and its indicator so we have the familiar pill shape. Now I can easily revert the icon size to 1.5M. Let's see how it looks so far. Now, in order for it to behave like a real toggle switch, we want a state of affairs where the indicator moves to the right when a user clicks on the button and returns to its original position when they click again, just like the switches on your mobile device settings. This effect works by adding or removing a class among the list of classes assigned to the button. You'll see it in action shortly. Now, we'll select the layout toggle button. Make sure that you are on the ID level and the class is not active, otherwise this step will not work. Under the Styles tab in the CSS classes field, I'm going to add a class which I'll call isActive. Now, this might be a little confusing because there's already a class field at the top of the panel, and indeed we can also add the class up there instead, and it would work just fine. But this field is preferable for when you need to add utility classes or reference classes that you do not need to style using the builder. Also, any class we add at the top gets saved in the database, but down here, you're simply adding a class to the element with no strings attached. Now, back to the layout toggle, let's add a new rule. We'll write root, or for the sake of clarity, I'll write layout toggle dot isActive. Note that there's no space between the two class names. In CSS, this implies that they both exist on the same element at the same time. So we're saying when you see these two classes on the same element, do something. Now, I'll add the before element to the selection since that's what we want to affect. Translate 100%. You'll observe that the indicator immediately jumps 100% on the x-axis. So you see that for as long as the isActive class is present, the element goes right. But if I remove it, it returns to its original position. Now we want it to translate smoothly instead of the sudden jump. So I'll head back to where we defined the original pseudo element and add a transition property. Now when we remove or add the class, the indicator visibly moves. I'll increase the size of the icons again so it's more visible. We now need to toggle the class using interactions. First, I'll remove the class. Then make sure the layout toggle class is selected because we need to bind the interaction to the class. Then I'll add a new interaction. So we want to say when the user clicks on the button, toggle an attribute. The attribute is a class which will have a value of isActive. Let's preview at the front end. Now, when we click, the action takes place. To further illustrate, let's open the inspector. Observe that the list of classes updates each time we click to toggle the button. This, my friend, is the foundational principle behind many other interesting functions, such as your menu drop-down, mobile menu, accordion, and even tabs. We'll now go ahead and leverage this technique in changing the layout of the postcards. If you haven't already, check out my multi-level header menu template for Bricks Builder. It's designed to provide a robust starting point in creating a simple yet powerful header menu relatively quickly. The template also includes a CSS style sheet where I've curated all the most important styling options in one place, so you don't have to go hunting around the Bricks user interface to have a header menu that looks and feels exactly how you would want. My favorite feature by far is that it offers a true multi-level experience on mobile, making content easily accessible without overwhelming your users. Plus, you can replace the boring old toggle icon with something more delightful. You can purchase the multi-level header template at the link in the description below. Let's get back to it. Before we proceed, let me return the toggle icon to its normal size. Now select the container that holds the postcards. And just like before, add a utility class called isRow. We'll use the presence or absence of this class to control the layout of the container and the cards. With the postContainer class selected, we'll add a new CSS rule. Presently, the post container is set to display in a grid layout, but we'll come here and say when post container and isRow exist together, set the display to flex. That should take care of the layout, but we have to style the cards as well. So I'll add another rule that simply implies that when blog card has a remote parent that has the classes post container and isRow, do the following. Now the layout also changes as we remove or add the class. All we need to do is toggle the isRow class with the toggle button above. Before binding the interactions, I'll quickly show you how you can make some responsive decisions by using this technique to hide certain items depending on which layout the user is viewing on a particular breakpoint. For example, we might want to hide the excerpt when the user is viewing the list layout on a mobile device. To do this, I'll copy the selector and paste it in the CSS panel for the mobile breakpoint. This time, I'll point to the excerpt and set the display to none. Now, the excerpt is visible in list mode but hidden for mobile. Back to the interaction. Select the layout toggle, and with the class selected, we'll add another click interaction. The settings will be just like before, except that the attribute value will be isRow, and the target will be the element that has the post container class. While we're here, I'll remove the isRow class so that the default state will be the grid layout. Now, I'll set the target to CSS selector, which is of course post container. Remember to add the initial dot since we are referring to a valid CSS selector here. Now, let's save and preview. You can see it works as expected. On the inspector, you can also see the classes being toggled. The next thing we can do is to include a fade-in animation for each time the layout is changed, instead of the instant change. For the animation, we'll target the post container element, and I'll be writing the initial code right in the inspector style sheet so we get instant feedback before bringing it into bricks. I'll add a new CSS rule, then open in the inspector style sheet. Just above, I'll add a new keyframe called appear list, which will animate from an opacity of 0. It's a simple rule, nothing complex. Now, I'll say when post container and isRow exist together, perform the animation referenced above. Now, when I click the toggle, you see the list layout fades into view. But notice that the grid layout has no animation. Now, you might expect that all you need to do is add an animation property to the post container that will reference the appear list timeline. But it doesn't work that way. As you can see, it just stops working altogether. The simplest way I found to get around this issue was to set up another animation keyframe with the exact same values and reference that one separately. If you know of a more efficient way to achieve this, feel free to let us know in the comments. Now, the fading animation works both ways as expected, which is cool. All we need to do is transfer the code into bricks. Now, this looks all well and good, but our toggle button wouldn't be of much use to some audiences if we don't take some steps to make it more accessible. In order to make it more accessible, we need to add 2 new attributes to the button. The first one is called area label, which I'll give a value of layout toggle. Layout toggle is what users with screen readers will hear announced when they navigate to the toggle button. I'll add another attribute called area pressed. This will help to notify the user on the current state of the button, whether it is active or not. By default, I'll set its value to false. This leads us to the next step where we'll need custom JavaScript to change the value of this attribute to true when the user clicks the button. Unfortunately, we cannot use interactions to directly toggle the value of an attribute, but we can use interactions to trigger a JavaScript function which we will write to toggle the attribute value. So we'll go ahead and do just that. Please note that everything we've done so far with interactions can easily be summarized in a single JavaScript snippet, which might be the way to go if you are comfortable writing JavaScript. The Bricks Interactions feature just gives us an interface to quickly apply some common JavaScript operations. Now, inside the container, I'll add a code element. Ideally, this code should be inside the button, but I don't like how it messes with the layout of the button inside the builder preview, so I'll just place it out in the parent container. Clear out everything we don't need. Then we'll paste the JavaScript function. Execute the code and render without wrapper. Now I'll copy the function name. Then add a new click interaction to the layout toggle and set the action to JavaScript function. I'll paste the name of the function we just copied, and that's about all we need to do here. Now upon inspection, you see the new attributes have been added to the button. The area pressed attribute is currently false, but when I click the button, its value is switched to true. Now let's see what happens when you use a screen reader here.
Skip to footer main landmark layout toggle button not pressed. Pressed. Not pressed. Banner landmark list with main landmark layout toggle button not pressed. Key ILOUT layout toggle button not pressed.
So that's how to set up an accessible layout toggle button in Bricks. If you prefer to skip this whole process, I'll have a ready version of the layout template available for purchase. You can access the link in the description. Feel free to post in the comments if you have any questions or need clarification. If you found this tutorial helpful, be sure to click the subscribe button so you don't miss out on more nifty tutorials that I have planned. If you need a new website design or for general consultation, you can drop a message through my website's contact form or schedule a meeting. All linked in the description. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.